right, so with Pfizer and Moderna both saying earlier this month the coronavirus vaccines they have are about 95% effective, AstraZeneca and Oxford University announced the results of their trials, and they're about 70% effective, which are going, I like the more effective ones better. CDC says anything over 50% is good. We're good there. So now we've got three. Plus you've got Russia, and I think China's doing some stuff too, and there's other ones in the pike. But all right, it looks like we're starting to get these things in, and the question now is how do we handle distribution, and when are we going to be able to get a vaccine? That is the million-dollar question. With that, Paul Seegert this morning, managing partner of PCS Advisers. They do employee benefits consulting, and he's studying this issue. Paul, good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, thanks. So we've never faced anything on this scale before in our lifetimes, for sure, and there's a certain urgency and complexity about this whole thing, and the rollout of this is going to be unbelievable. I mean, I don't even know where to begin with this. We've never done anything of this scope and scale before.
Yeah, that's true. And then when you also account for the fact that some of these viruses require cold storage at negative 20 or negative 70 degrees, I mean, very cold storage. It's when you think about rural areas, that's a kind of storage facility that they may not have in their hospitals there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can do dry ice, but that's a short-term solution.
Right. So that's just about daily. There's news on this subject, and some of the more recent news, like the AstraZeneca, as an example, can be normally refrigerated. So that's a big plus there.
Yeah. Something like more than 80% of hospitals have absolutely no surge capacity planning. I mean, they haven't been able to, because of this, take time out to breathe, let alone do surge capacity planning. And I mean, we're headed in the cold and flu season again. And right now, as it stands, something north of 2,000 healthcare professionals have died from coronavirus while treating patients. National Nurses United, it's a big union, had a press conference yesterday, said that number is actually a gross underestimate. And also considering the fact that how many alone are in life support or still are in ICU or just coming out of this thing. Should the frontline workers get this vaccine first?
Yeah, I believe that's the plan. That's what I expect that we'll see. Frontline workers, followed by other high-risk groups. And there'll be a group that informs the CDC that will make that decision, but that is what we're expecting to see.
As far as that high-risk group goes, we're talking 65-plus, people with comorbidities. That's to be expected. It's probably, I would think the military would probably be there first, wouldn't you?
Well, from what we're hearing so far, it will be health workers, followed by, as you mentioned, folks with comorbidities and the elderly. It likely won't be until April, May, June, July, somewhere in that time frame, when healthy and younger folks are going to be getting access to these vaccines.
It could be in the upwards of a year, I would think, before we fully have this thing spread out among all the community. Okay, so we go through the first few layers of this. Obviously, at some point you will have more on that in a second, the military, but frontline workers, obviously 65 plus, people who have underlying health issues that are extremely vulnerable in this thing. Would they distribute that in the hotspots first in areas around the country in order to tamp that down, or wouldn't it matter because it's so late in arriving?
Well, that's a question that's yet to be answered. Whether they'll send it to hotspots or try and evenly distribute the virus is still unknown. We do know that first responders will get it first, healthcare workers, or we assume that's what they're indicating, and then other essential jobs. Mm-hmm. Teachers, food workers, and so on.
Yeah, I don't know how you handle the refrigeration aspect. Now, as I was reading through this, and Paul, you probably maybe know about this more than I do, but they just tested this vaccine and said, okay, well, during this trial stage, we're going to refrigerate it at 6,000 degrees below zero, whatever the number is. But we don't know if it'll be viable at warmer temperatures, or they just didn't test it at warmer temperatures, I guess is what I'm saying. So it probably would be fine for 30 days or whatever. It's not like the minute you unfreeze it, it spoils like milk or something like that.
That's true. We expect that this is probably they're being more cautious than necessary, and they'll be able to get these out. And they've really already put together a pretty impressive supply chain and unique packaging to do it. And then with some of these others, AstraZeneca, as an example, Johnson & Johnson's, Novavax, the first couple are coming in. They're expected to get approval in the first couple of weeks of December for, get their emergency approval and get distributed. Not long behind that, we would have AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Novavax. They're all on track to have that same kind of ability to start distributing by February, we would expect.
Okay, so February distribution for that, but ultimately when it's your average person like me or someone listening, you're going, okay, what about me and my family? When can I reasonably expect to be able to go to the pharmacy or my physician and get this vaccine?
Yeah, I think that's going to be likely summer before that happens. They're going to be distributing it, and we'll continue to watch daily news on this topic. It's, as you pointed out, this is something we've never encountered before. I was reading just this morning that the European Union is now contracted with 7 different drug makers for 1.56 billion doses of vaccine, and we're doing the same, similar thing here in this country. And then it'll just be a race to get those supplies out and distributed around the country. They think, and I have to emphasize, that if we get 70% of the population that will have either been infected, which is typically is the best protection, or gets one of these viruses or one of these vaccines, that we'll have herd immunity. That relies on some assumptions, because we really don't know. We've been in such strict lockdowns for so long, we don't know the true transmission rate. And we also don't know for sure if, once you've taken the vaccine, if you then could still be a carrier of the vaccine and spread, the virus.
Well, that's the $1 million question, right? Is this, they always people make the comparison between this and the flu virus, and it's not the same thing at all. However, we know that the seasonal flu virus, influenza, mutates, right? So right now on the other side of the world, where it's, they're heading in the summer, they're going to study what our flu patterns are in order to develop their vaccine. And then we just flip over when we're in summer, that we're looking at what the patterns are on the other half of the globe. And we calculate whenever we see what that particular strain is, we put it in our vaccine and hope it works. And it's kind of a crapshoot, because largely it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we miss wildly. Is it the same thing here, do we think, with COVID, or is it just simply so early in this thing we don't know?
It's so early that we don't know. There's a lot of unknowns still. And so they're just going to run on this assumption that if we can get 70% to be, and then there's another question there: how many folks have actually had it? We've got 12 million confirmed cases, but likely it's way north of that, because so many people are asymptomatic. It could be 50 million that have already had it.
Yeah, and then there are people getting it, a second time or exposed to it a couple times, and they have no effects to it whatsoever. We've heard a handful of those stories, and that's extremely small. But again, we don't know the path of this thing.
Yep, that's very true.
Is it entirely possible we could be getting 2 vaccines a year for the rest of our lives against COVID?
Yeah, that is an absolute possibility, which I think you see such an arms race to get these vaccines out there. This is the biggest event for pharmaceuticals in our lifetime.
Paul Seegert is managing partner of PCS Advisers. I'm with Sloan on 700 WLW. They do employee benefits consulting, and he is obviously keeping tabs of the vaccine distribution for COVID-19 and the coronavirus. And we're talking about how to get this market. If you just joined us, he's thinking that for the average person, probably by summer sometime, the vaccine should be widely enough available after you get through the frontline workers and people over age 65, the most vulnerable. For regular folks, it's going to be that. But we still have this issue. You're saying about 70% between getting natural immunity, herd immunity, developing that through natural means, meaning you got COVID, survived it, or you got COVID and you didn't realize you got COVID. That's fine. Right. Check that box. The other one, of course, is the vaccine. Something around probably less than 40% of Americans say that they would get the vaccine. Is that too low for this to work?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to watch as well. We saw some polling that had been done in New Jersey where they said 40% wouldn't take it, 60% would. Likely that could get us close to that herd immunity number, considering that many folks will have had COVID or without, whether they know it or not. And then I just saw another one today, 25% of New Yorkers say they would not take it. But that leaves 75 who would. Okay. So I think it's gaining popularity or gaining acceptance. There's been some, on both sides politically, there's been sound bites that I think probably haven't been that helpful in terms of messaging that maybe this process is rushed, and comparing it to other vaccines that have been developed. I mean, prior 4 years was the fastest that we've gotten a vaccine to market and approved for human use. But these are a different type of vaccine in many cases. They are mRNA versus a deadened form of the virus. It is a longer process generally in development. So we're not seeing that it appears that it's been rushed. Fortunately, they were able to start research on these vaccines before they even had confirmed cases.
You know, Paul, I think what hurts these guys, too, is the fact that, and I've mentioned this many times on my show before when it comes to the FDA, is they'll green-light a drug, they'll beta test it, they'll do trials, finally it'll come to market, the FDA will stamp it, and then a few years later we learn it does something horrible to you. And, of course, now we've got to sue the bank company out of existence, and the FDA has no responsibility, of course. If we see that pattern develop, and of course, we've also heard about horrible things our government does in the past, experiments, syphilis experiments in Tuskegee and elsewhere. Americans are very distrustful of our government, too. Is that a healthy skepticism right now?
Well, I certainly understand it. I've talked to other people in the industry who've indicated some hesitation at being the first to take the vaccine because it is this will be the first time we've had medical RNA vaccines for human use. So it's a breakthrough that I think will end up being overall positive in that there's indications that we could use this same type of technology for other diseases. And
that sounds all well and good, but no one wants to be first, right?
Exactly.
You want to do it? Go ahead. Knock yourself out. If you start growing a third head, and you already have one, and all of a sudden now 2 heads are popping off your shoulders, hey, I'm good.
Yeah,
one mouth to feed is plenty in my book.
Perhaps it makes sense.
Right.
And young, healthy folks will likely be the ones that are last to have an interest in getting it.
And right now we're seeing a spike, right? And especially, I think, with young people traveling over the holidays, 18 to 29-year-olds right now, at least in Hamilton County, we have the highest numbers here in Cincinnati, Paul Seegert, that we have seen since the virus began. So I wonder if you're going to see this explode. Now, I know that, traditionally coming up Wednesday night, the biggest bar night of the year tomorrow, that the bars are going to be shutting down certainly a lot earlier. But I don't think you're going to tell young folks especially that they're not going to gather with their friends that they haven't seen in a long time, and let alone traveling through the airports and everything. That's kind of a frightening proposition.
Yeah, we're seeing daily records in hospitalizations and infections, and that, I believe, is somewhat expected. But there's no doubt that we'll see a bigger spike coming out of the holidays.
Yeah, final question, I think it ties in this, when we get to the distribution element, is that I would think that the military would be involved in this, wouldn't you? I mean, essentially what military is really, really good at, is logistics. That's how wars are won, right? Logistics, getting the supplies to the troops on the front lines. That's always been the case. Wars are won and lost on logistics. Before that was even a term, I would think on this war with COVID, the same thing would apply, wouldn't you?
Yeah, in fact, when you look back at the task force that was put together by the current administration, they did tap into that military knowledge of logistics to get all the PPE that was needed and distributed, and it was a really impressive effort. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if we rely on that same kind of expertise, as you pointed out, to get the vaccine distributed around the country. So
bottom line, Paul Seegert, and that is we're going to roll this thing out probably by February, you said, for most folks who don't suffer from comorbidities, who aren't age 65, who are not frontline healthcare workers, those who aren't the ones who should be getting this first. For the rest of us in the back of the pack, we're thinking about when?
Well, we're going to have a couple of, the first 2 will be out by the end of the year, 40 million doses. You do need to take 2 doses of those. And then we'll have 5. It appears that we'll have 5 approved by February and out. And I think the middle of the summer is likely for those of us who are kind of in the average healthy group of people. Now, those that they say have higher risk, that includes a number of 200 million people in this country, just because of the lifestyle.
Sure, yeah, right. Our life, we're killing ourselves with a knife and fork
before the rest of us can have access.
Right. So it's going to be a while. So midsummer, maybe by for those of us, and I think that'll be interesting. And seeing who takes it is another issue entirely. So again, Paul Seegert on the show this morning on 700 WLW. He's managing partner at PCS Advisers. They do employee benefit consulting, and they are obviously on top of it here too because of their clients. So Paul, thanks for the info. Really good intel.